The story of this build is as follows. I was watching a 4-hour furniture build, and my daughter asked me to build them a desk. Not any desk, but one with crayons just like Chris Salamone's crayon inlay river tables. While this build is inspired by the crayons, we were able to mix in some epoxy in a fun way to put a nice remix to the concept. Stay tuned and see how this one plays out. Because the build has many steps, I'm going to break it up into 2 parts. I'm also going to gloss over some of the routine tasks so that I can highlight the main parts of the build to keep the video at a reasonable length. For the first part of the video, we're going to focus on most of the wooden elements by building the desktop and designing and shaping of the leg. For the second part of the build, we're going to work on the drawers, the lids, and all the epoxy and crayon elements. After milling and gluing up the boards into panels, I laid out all the storage cubbies and marked the top and bottom of the boards to keep the orientation. The desk will have 2 small cubbies at the top of the desk for pencils and crayons and the like, and 1 big cubby in the middle for some bigger storage items. To create the cubbies, I use simple butt joints as none of the joints will be visible. I then attach them to the bottom panel using the trusted domino. I have to say this tool has given me the confidence to take on much bigger builds and much more intricate joinery. It's also satisfying when everything disassembles nice and flush. Once the parts have been assembled together with the desktop panel, I proceeded to cut out the openings with the jigsaw and then write out the cubbies flush. This was the most scary and at the same time most exciting part of the build. The vision was starting to take shape. After routing, I took some time to clean up all the corners to make sure they are nice and square. Hand tools isn't my forte, but it was easy enough with a flush trim saw and a semi-sharp chisel. After dry fitting and making sure that everything checked out, I proceeded with the glue up. What normally would be a tricky glue up was made quite easy with the dominoes. I want to give a quick shout out to Typebond. The folks over there sent me over some glue and they've been pretty supportive in allowing me to keep my overhead costs down. So once all the joints were glued, I proceeded to clamp. As you can see, I used a lot of clamps for this one to make sure that everything was set right. At this point in the build, I turned my attention to the base of the desk. I wanted to have a slight retro look to the desk, so I settled on a design that angles the front and back legs. The back flares out about 1 to 2 degrees, and the front flares forward about 3 degrees. While this doesn't seem like much, it creates a subtle angle that isn't too pronounced, but adds a bit of interest to the design while keeping it modern. Another design choice to keep in line with that retro look was to taper the legs. I used my tapering jig with my match fit clamps. At the table saw, I carefully cut the angles on the legs and then matched the angles on the stretchers. The length of the top stretcher is determined by the width of the base. The length of the bottom stretcher is marked while everything is in place to get a precise fit. Once all the parts were cut to length with the appropriate angles, I used a domino to cut the joinery. The leg assembly was pretty simple. A little bit of glue and the dominoes and everything came together really nice. A little trick I use during glue up is to add some sawdust to the joint line. This allows the joint to close really tight and you'll barely see a joint line once it's all dry and sanded. I also decided to add a 3/8 round over to ease the outside edges while keeping the inside edges square for a visual contrast, and also tie in the square top. Once all the legs were sanded and the stretches cut and sanded as well, I proceeded to mark out the locations for the domino. Using the domino, I cut mortises into the stretchers of the legs. Gluing up this bad boy wasn't easy because I didn't have long enough clamps, but I was able to get it done connecting 2 clamps and saying a prayer. I added 2 long stretchers to the base, one towards the bottom to help with stability and racking, and also one flush to the top to have an attachment point for the base to the top. Once the base was dry, I turned my attention to attaching the base to the tabletop. You guessed it, once again, I used the trusty domino. With the base assembled, we have come to the end of the first part of this build. Stay tuned for the second part of the build, where you'll see me build out the drawers and the drawer fronts, the lids for the top, using crayons and epoxy. Hope you've enjoyed this portion of the build so far, and looking forward to the second half of the build. And here is a message from the kids.
My dad made this zebra box and it's so nice. My dad made this zebra box and it's so nice.
Gotta love the kids. I'm sure if you made it this far, you're enjoying the build. Please subscribe and hit that notification button for future videos.